Alrighty, so now that we have talked in depth about protocols and delegates, let's get back into our good Eaton's app, all right? And let's do a little bit of a review since it's been a little bit since we've been in here. In the lesson before we started talking about protocols and delegates, we added our table view, took a look at its properties and everything in here. Then we added our table view cell, and we added our burger image view and our burgers label. All right, so now what we need to do is actually hook up our table view to our view controller. So I'm going to hold Option and click on View Controller. And that will open up our view controller in the Assistant Editor. And I'm going to close our document outline down here to give us a little bit more room. And then with the table view selected, make sure you have the table view selected and not the cell. I'm going to hold Control and drag over into our view controller. And this is going to be an outlet, and I'm just going to call it table view. Okay, and we're going to say connect. All right, perfect. So now we have our table view wired up. I'm going to close our Assistant Editor, open up our view controller, and let's take a quick look at our UI table view documentation here. So I clicked on it, and in our quick help, I'm going to scroll down to our documentation. And let's just quickly scroll through here and see what we have. It says a table view displays a list of items in a single column. Okay, so that's important to remember that if you need to do any horizontal scrolling, you're going to need a collection view, which we're going to cover coming up here. All right, but a table view is a subclass of UI scroll view, which allows users to scroll through the table. The cells comprising the individual items of the table are UI table view cell objects. UI table view uses these objects to draw the visible rows of the table. Each cell has content, titles, and images, and can have near the right edge accessory views. Okay, and then there's a lot more. I would actually encourage you to read through this just to kind of give you a general understanding of all of the properties. And even if it doesn't make complete sense to you, later on things might click and you'll be like, oh yeah, I need to do something. And I remember seeing something about that in the documentation. Then you can come back and see how to implement it. For instance, later on you might need to say, when something happens, I need to scroll to a specific row. And you'll think, oh yeah, I remember reading about this method in the table view. Scroll to row at index path, and I can make that happen, all right? So to really use a table view, what we need to do is implement two protocols, all right? So this is where the last couple of lessons come in, all right? The UI table view has these two protocols, UI table view delegate. You can see here that this says the delegate of a UI table view object must adopt the UI table view delegate protocol. Optional methods of the protocol allow the delegate to manage selections, configure section headings and footers, help to delete and reorder cells, and perform other actions. Okay, so we want this delegate. And then we also need a second protocol, which is the UI table view data source. Okay, and this is the UI table view data source protocol is adopted by an object that mediates the application's data model for a UI table view object. The data source provides the table view object with the information it needs to construct and modify a table view. Okay, so we can actually go and check out what are in these protocols. Okay, so if I pull over our simple example and we look at our protocol, we see that we have a protocol and a name for our protocol delegate, and then we have these functions, okay? And if we open up, you can open up these, the actual code for these if you hold Command and click, and then say jump to definition. Okay, and so you can see here the similarities. We are declaring it as a protocol, we give it a name, and then down here we have these functions. All right, and so this is some of the methods that are available for the table view. And you'll see here that some of these are optional. So we didn't cover optional methods in our protocols in the last couple of lessons. That just means that optional methods are not required to implement for a type to conform to a protocol, okay? All right, so we have implemented our two protocols, but if you remember, the next step is to conform. to those protocols, okay? So all of the methods in UI TableView delegate are optional. There are only 2 required methods, and those are in the UI TableView data source. So if you click here, it's going to tell us which ones they are. So we say fix, and we get 2 methods added right here. I'm going to cut those and paste them down here below. So again, going back to our example that you should be familiar with, this is akin to, in our home VC, we implemented our login complete delegate, and we conformed to it by implementing the user created method. Okay, so in the last lesson, I went through the 4 steps of doing a protocol delegate pattern. Step 1 was to write the protocol and add the required methods. Now, we were working with 2 view controllers that we created ourselves, 2 separate classes. In this case, we are working with a class that has been already created and written for us, the UI TableView and its delegates. So step 1 has already been done for us. The protocol has already been written. Step 2 is to implement and conform to the protocol in the delegate class. So we have implemented and we have now conformed to the protocols. Step 3 was to, in the delegator class, create a delegate variable and call the desired method at the desired time. So again, this has already been done for us inside of the UI TableView. And if we command click and say jump to definition, you'll see here that this is the code for a UI TableView. This is what is actually running that widget that you dragged into your storyboard. And you can see here that we have a variable for our delegate and for our data source of the types of the protocols that we have implemented. And again, going back to our simple example, in our login VC, we have our delegate variable. So even though this might seem a lot more complicated with a lot more variables and methods, it's really just more of the same. We just were doing it at a simplified level. We still have our delegate variables, we still have our protocols, and we still have to follow the same steps. Now, do you remember step 4, the one that is most often forgotten when working with delegates? We need to set the view controller to be the delegate for our UI table view, so that when, and I'm going to jump back into the UI TableView definition, so that when it uses this delegate to perform actions, the view controller can be notified. Okay, so we need to say TableView.delegate is equal to self, and then we also need TableView.dataSource is equal to self. So now our view controller is serving as the TableView's delegate, and this means that the view controller provides answers to requests and messages about the layout of the table and actions the user performs on the table view. Okay, so again, if we check out the UI TableView delegate, we'll see things like height for row at, where you can specify the height of rows, things like adding headers and footers, did select row at, so whenever we click on a cell, these are all methods that we can implement since we have implemented the UI TableView delegate, and we will be informed by the table view when those actions occur. We are also setting the view controller as the table view's data source, and this means that the view controller will provide data for the sections and rows of a table and act on messages that change a table's data. The data source is asked for the data for a cell when the table is drawn. So for instance, with our app here, we have our table view here. The view controller is acting as the data source. And so the view controller is going to need to provide the information like which images and which labels to provide for each cell. So speaking of data, let's go ahead and get our data here. And if you crawl from our data set, we have all of the information we need right here in this dataset class. So in our view controller, speaking of, let's go ahead and drag our view controller into our controller folder here. And let's go ahead and initialize a dataset class. So I'm going to say let data equal data set. All right, perfect. So now let's take a look at these protocol methods. Our first one here is number of rows in section. And if you click on it, it says that this tells the data source to return the number of rows in a given section of a table view. Okay, so looking back at our app, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So looking back at our app, we have a specific number, and this actually comes from our data set. So if we take a look here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and these are in the categories array. So what we can do is we can say data, or we're going to return the number of items in that array. So I'm going to say data.categories.count. So we looked inside of the data set, we looked at the categories, and we used the property count to determine how many items are in the categories array. So now our table view knows how many rows are in the section and how many to display. All right, now let's take a look at this one right here. Cell for row at, and we get the index path, and we need to return from this method an instance of a UI table view cell. Okay, let's check out what a UI table view cell is. In our storyboard, we have one right here, right? So I'm going to open up our document view, and this is our UI table view cell. Okay, so if we open up our documentation here, then we can see that this class includes properties and methods for setting and managing cell content and background, including text, images, and custom views, managing the cell selection and highlight state, managing accessory views, and initiating the editing of the cell contents. All right, so in this method, we are going to return a UI table view cell that will then be added here in our table view. Now, before we get into this method right here, we need to do a little bit of work first, okay? So in the storyboard, if you recall, clicking on our table view cell, I said that we were going to come back to this reuse identifier, right? So here under identifier, we're going to say food category, and let's just call it category cell, okay? And this reuse identifier is important because you could actually have more than one prototype cell here in your table view, so that under different circumstances you could add different types of cells. And so we need an identifier to let our method here know which type of cell to add. Okay, so we add that reuse identifier so that we can identify which cell to use. Next thing we're going to do is we are going to create a custom class for our cell. Okay, so this is a common practice to separate the concerns of managing the table view cell's content. Okay, so right here under view, I'm going to right click and say new file, and this is going to be a Cocoa Touch class, and we need a UI table view cell. Okay, and we're going to call this category cell. I'm going to say next and create. All right, so just like the view controller is responsible for managing the view of the entire view controller, this category cell right here, we are delegating the responsibility of handling its UI to this category cell, which is a subclass of UI table view cell. So in our storyboard, we need to set the category cell class to category cell, just like we set our view controller as a whole to be the class of the viewcontroller.swift file that is controlling it. This category cell.swift is controlling the UI of our table view cell. So we need to hook up our images and our label to that category cell. So I'm going to option click on category cell, close our document view here, and now we can add outlets to our category cell. So I'm going to click on our image here. I'm going to control and drag, and I'm going to call this category image, and I'm going to say connect. Then I'm going to grab our label, and I'm going to control and drag, and I'm going to call this category title. I'm going to say connect. And if you recall from our app, the Image has a rounded corner. So here in awake from nib, and this is a method that prepares the receiver for service after it has been loaded from an interface builder, archive, or nib file. Basically, this is one of the very first methods that is called when this TableView cells view is being loaded, okay? So here we are going to say category image dot layer dot corner radius is equal to 10. Okay, so now whenever a cell is added, we are going to add a corner radius to the image. We're not going to work with any of the set selected method, but basically this is a method that sets the selected state of the cell, optionally animating the transition between states. All right, but we're not going to work with that in this lesson. What we need now is a function that when we call it, actually configures these two outlets here. So I'm going to close this and jump back into our category cell.swift file. So I'm going to say func, and we're going to create a configure cell function, okay? And this function is going to set the correct category image and the correct category title, depending on what is passed into this cell. So we are going to pass into this function a food category, okay? And this is the food category struct that we have here, which has properties of title and image name. So given this category, we can set the category image and title for each cell. So I'm going to say category image dot image is equal to UI image, and then we can initialize it with a name. Okay, and this is just going to be the category that is passed in and its image name property. And then we can set the category title dot text equal to, and that's just category dot title. Okay, so how does this function get called right here? How does this configure cell get called when we need it? Well, let's jump back into the view controller.swift and let's talk about this cell for row at function. So over here in the quick help, it says that the returned UI TableView cell object is frequently one that the application reuses for performance reasons. You should fetch a previously created cell object that is marked for reuse by sending a DQ reusable cell with identifier message to the table view. Okay, so this DQ reusable cell method is important. Basically, for performance reasons, if you look at an app with a table view, you'll see all of these views. Now, right now, our app only has a few categories, but if you had an app that had, say, hundreds of items in your table view, the table view doesn't load views, doesn't load table view cells for every single item in the data source. It will only load as many as are needed to display on this screen at any given time, plus a little extra on the top and bottom if needed, okay? And so then when you scroll and you're scrolling off, what is happening is that the view is being recycled, it's being reused. The cell is being DQ'd and reused and recycled, okay? And this improves the performance of the table views. So what we need to do is we need to say, let's get one of those cells that have been DQ'd and we can reuse. And the way to do that is we say if let cell is equal to TableView.DQ reusable cell with identifier for index path, okay? And this is where our identifier comes in. This is the reuse identifier that we added for our cell. So just a reminder, if we come back here into our category cell, here in the, let's see here, right here, the identifier, we have category cell here. So I'm gonna copy that and view controller, and with identifier, category cell for index path, and we can just pass in this variable here, index path. And index path, that is, again, looking at our simulator here, the index path is going to be represented by which item is being currently DQ'd or clicked on or anything like that. So this would be index path.row equals 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on, okay? Now we are DQing Now we are asking the table view for a dequeued cell, and that would just return us a generic UI table view cell. We need it to be a category cell. So I'm going to cast it as a category cell. And so if we are able to get a dequeued reusable cell, and we are able to cast it as a category cell, now we can say cell.configure cell. And this is the function that we created right here. And we need to pass into it a food category. So the way to pass in the correct food category for that particular index path is we access our data. So I'm going to say data.categories. And then using our subscript, we can pass in index path.row. And this will go into the data.categories, and depending on which row is currently being dequeued, so if it's the burger cell that is being dequeued currently, then it will go into the data set and get the 0th item, which is burgers, pass this food category into category cell, which will get the image and text properties for it, which is burgers and the image name burger 0. And then it goes on to the next one. Then it goes to pasta, and so it dequeues this cell and goes and gets the data category for index 1, which is the pasta. That gets passed here to cell.configure cell, which then goes to our category cell and configures the cell. And that will happen for every cell that is being displayed. Okay, so we're getting yelled at here because it says we are missing a return in a function expected to return a UI table view cell. So we haven't returned anything. So after we configure this cell, we are going to return it. So I'm just going to say return cell. So this is if we are successful in dequeuing a reusable cell. If not, then we're just going to return a generic UI table view cell. Okay, so these two methods come from the data source protocol. Now we're going to use one from the table view delegate. Remember, I looked at the height for row one, so I'm going to start typing height for row at, okay? And we are just going to return 200, okay? So that is the height of our rows. And that should be enough for this to work. Let's go ahead and run it. Hey, looky there. Burgers, pasta, pizza, salad, sandwiches. All right, so we got a little bit of couple things to work on here. We need to make this actually fit, but yeah, there we go. That is awesome. We are displaying our first table view information. All right, so just to recap, let's go ahead and talk about what we did this lesson. We connected our table view. We implemented our two protocols that we need, the table view delegate and the table view data source. We set those delegate and data source equal to self, being the view controller, so that the table view can notify us when specific things happen and give it information that it needs, such as the number of rows to present and what cell to display, as well as the height for the rows. We created our category cell.swift subclass, and we delegated the managing of the UI to this class, created our configure cell function, and call that for each cell that is dequeued and returned. All right, so hope this has been clear for you. I know it's been a little bit of a long video, but we learned a lot, and I hope it was clear. If not, you can watch it over again, crank up the speed, do it at 2x, and kind of just try to absorb as much as you can. All right, so this has been Johnny B, and I'll see you in the next one.